Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 19th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson. Welcome to CityWide. So when you first came into office, a lot of the focus was on the conduct of your predecessor. Now you own the office. You've been there for more than a year. But there's still one important area where I guess old business is still very much new business, and that's your conviction review unit. So tell us what that is, what they've been doing, but more importantly, why did you create a unit like that?
Well, I created the conviction review unit because it was important to get the public to have trust and faith in the criminal justice system. You know, the Brooklyn DA's office, before I became DA, over the last couple of years, was really the subject of a number of negative news reports. And there was allegations that people were wrongfully convicted by that office back in the day. And so when I ran, I said I would look into those cases because I think it's important to make sure that the people of Brooklyn have confidence in their criminal justice system, and they have to have confidence in their DA. And so it was important to restore that public confidence, but it's also important to correct miscarriages of justice. And so I've created this unit. It is probably the largest conviction review unit in the country. I have 10 prosecutors who work every day in the conviction review unit. It's led by 30-year prosecutor Mark Hale, who's had 200 jury trials, mostly homicide trials. And I have this very prominent law professor from Harvard Law School, Professor Ron Sullivan, who runs the unit. He's my special counsel. And what they do essentially, Ken, is they look at old cases to make sure that justice was done. It is not an effort to free people from prison. It's an effort to get to the truth. And so when I took office last year, I was faced with almost 100 homicide cases that had to be reviewed. And so I needed to look at those cases, and I didn't have a unit in place. I had 2 prosecutors out of 500 who were looking at those cases. So I built a real conviction review unit. I went to the city council, I went to the mayor's office, and it costs about $1.1 million annually. And so far, we've looked at about 30 cases. And in those 30 cases, we're standing by the convictions in most of those cases.
That's interesting. I'm not sure the public realizes that.
Yeah. We've looked at cases, including cases that involve this former New York City detective, Louis Scarcella. Many of the cases that we're standing by, he was involved in. Because the purpose of this unit, the goal is to get to the truth. But yet, in 12 cases, we've concluded after a thorough and fair investigation that men were wrongfully convicted for a host of reasons. And we moved in the interest of justice to vacate those convictions.
In some cases, people still in prison were released
Yes.
as a result of that.
Yes, a number of the convictions that we moved to vacate were of men who were still incarcerated. And Ken, they weren't incarcerated for 2 years. They were incarcerated for 20 some odd years in prison, wrongfully. And so I think the people of Brooklyn want a DA who understands that I have to keep the people of Brooklyn safe, but I also have to do justice.
One of the things that struck me looking back over your professional career, I remember when the Abner Louima case first hit the public awareness.
Yes.
And he was brutalized in a police precinct where he could not have been anybody other than police officers. But I remember my police friends at the time being in a state of disbelief. They were certain that the injuries that had occurred to him had happened someplace else. and the rumors that went around to try and discredit his credibility. Now, you were a prosecutor on the case with the police officers that were ultimately convicted of having perpetrated that outrage. But you talk about trust between the public and the criminal justice system. How do you assess the sort of state of credibility of the police department now? How does your own work, not only on the Louima case, but in terms of reviewing these convictions, how does that affect your working relationship with the police department on a daily basis?
Well, I think I have a very good relationship with the police department. I speak to Police Commissioner Bratton quite often because Brooklyn is important to the overall well-being of the city. I think that the police officers in the city literally put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. I think that we can do better, not just the police. I think as prosecutors, law enforcement as a whole can do better in terms of having a stronger relationship with the community. We need the community and the community needs us. And so what I think we need to go into the community, and that's what I started to do as the Brooklyn DA. I've held a series of town hall meetings in communities such as Brownsville, I've been to with my whole executive team, and to Coney Island, and we're going to go through other parts of the borough. I think that we have enormous work that we can do, that we can promote to the community to start strengthening that relationship. For instance, we have this new program called Project Reset, which is a joint effort by the NYPD and my office in Brooklyn and the Manhattan DA's office in Manhattan, where 16 and 17-year-olds who are arrested in Brooklyn for petty crimes in the 73rd precinct will now be given an opportunity to just go to a program before ever having to step foot in court. That's something that's remarkable because the NYPD is now partnering with the DA's office and other members of the community to divert young people from the criminal justice system. And I think that more people should know about it because our goal, our hope is to expand that and take it borough-wide. I think that will show people that the NYPD is taking steps to do more than just keep them safe, but to also protect the future of our youth. It's no one answer, Ken. I wish I could say if we did this one thing, everything will work out. I think it's going to take some time. I think there are challenges, but I think that we can meet them.
Do you consider your office exclusively a law enforcement office, or is it a crime prevention office?
It is both, and the crime prevention part is key. For example, I have created a new unit called Crime Strategies. Crime Strategies is designed to prevent gun violence from occurring in the first place. Often DAs and prosecutors around the country, we respond to acts of gun violence. That's what we have to do. But what if we were able to prevent the gun violence from occurring in the first place? So we know in law enforcement that the folks who are committing these shootings, not only in Brooklyn, in the city, but throughout the country, it's a small percentage of guys who come in and out of the criminal justice system all the time for different reasons, for riding in a stolen car, for fare evasion, but we don't pay attention to them. My Crime Strategies unit is now paying attention to these guys who we call them drivers of crime, impact players. And our goal is, as soon as they get arrested, we get notified. So the goal is to keep them off the street. And if we can do that, then they will not be in a position to shoot and kill on the streets of Brooklyn. The Manhattan DA's office has had a Crime Strategies unit for years, and we now have one in Brooklyn. So I think that my job as a Brooklyn DA is to also do crime prevention. And I want to build bridges with the community. I don't want to just look at the community in terms of just prosecuting people. I want folks to have trust in us, where they can call us, because the people in the community know about the crime sometimes before law enforcement does. But if they don't have trust in their police, if they don't trust their prosecutors, then they're never going to make that call. They're just going to suffer silently.
You mentioned particularly serious criminals, career criminals who also commit more petty crimes. So broken windows, the theory that if you allow small amounts of disorder to settle in, that it leads to more disorder, that the fare beater is somebody who, if he knows he's going to be arrested for jumping a turnstile, maybe he doesn't bring his gun with him when he goes into the subway. Where are you on that debate? There's now groups that think it was sort of used in a heavy-handed way and has outlived its usefulness.
Well, I think that broken windows can play a role, because when folks do hop the subway or try to evade the fare, sometimes they're caught with guns, or there's an outstanding warrant for them for something more serious. What I think some of the criticism has been coming from are folks who feel that it may not be applied evenly. Mm-hmm. And that's really the challenge, Ken. I mean, at the end of the day, if you can stop a more serious crime from happening, I don't know who would be against that. But it's the application that I think people may be concerned about.
In the same vein, have you been surprised that the rather dramatic drop in the number of stop question frisks starting at the end of the Bloomberg administration,
right,
despite their protestations that they, stood by the policy, but the number has gone down dramatically, yet we don't yet see a significant increase in rates of serious crimes. Are you surprised by that, or was that sort of in line with what you had anticipated?
I'm not surprised that the dramatic drop in stop and frisk occurred and crime has not gone through the roof. That doesn't surprise me. What surprised me was that we let stop and frisk get so high in the first place. In 2011, there were 685,000 stops and frisk in the city, mostly in Brooklyn. 2012, there were over 500,000. 2013, it was 191,000. And last year, I think we had about 40,000. What happened in those stops quite often was that people were left with a feeling of bitterness and resentment, because the vast majority, about 90% of the men who were stopped, men and women, were not found with any weapon or drug contraband on them. And so we need to be mindful that at the end of the day, the people in the community, if they feel that they're being targeted, are going to feel that they're being policed and not working with the police. And so I'm not surprised at all that the dramatic drop has not resulted in a spike in the crime rate. I think that there's a way to go about it, and that's why I created the Crime Strategies Unit, because stop and frisk was a sort of going to neighborhoods and stopping hundreds of thousands of people, trying to get to the guns and the drugs, trying to keep people safe. But the Crime Strategies Unit, we target and we focus on those who we believe are responsible for the shootings without stopping so many people.
I'm wondering also whether the quality of information that you get from police officers has improved. In conversations with my friends on the NYPD, I sometimes got the feeling that the pressure that they had to hit their numbers in terms of the numbers of people they questioned every week, and having to justify that, and then when arrests came out of it, having to justify the arrests, let me say, put a lot of pressure on the cops to come up with the right answers when they were asked questions, and not always completely reflect what actually happened. So I'm wondering, now that they actually have a little bit more breathing space, a little bit more discretion, whether you think that the police officers are coming across both in the community and also in the courtroom as more credible.
I think that the police officers are under enormous pressure. No matter what they do, they get criticized. If you ask the PBA president, Pat Lynch, he talks about quotas or the pressure to get numbers. He's been saying that for years, and I have enormous respect for Pat Lynch. But I would say that we in the Brooklyn DA's office we're actually seeing officers who I think are able to focus more now, because we don't have the high volume. I mean, when you have
quantity, not quality.
And that's important, because at the end of the day, we want to get the rapists off the street. We want to prevent shootings and homicides and domestic violence and elder abuse. And we have the finest police force in the world right here in New York City. And I think that when you're not concerned with volume, then you can focus on the more serious crimes that go to our quality of life and our basic safety in the city.
We're going to continue talking about innovative crime prevention and crime fighting strategies with Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson when Citywide continues right after this. Welcome back to Citywide. We're speaking with Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson. So you mentioned gun violence as an area that you were particularly focused on to make sure that career criminals were involved in acts of violence, including using firearms, were being properly tracked. But you know, it's a source of frustration, I think, that New York City has some of the toughest gun laws in the country. They don't manufacture Uzis in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The guns are coming from someplace else, and Congress doesn't seem particularly determined to interfere with that flow of weapons. Is there anything that a local prosecutor can do about guns coming into New York?
Yes. What we can do is we can follow the leads when we have a gun case, wherever those leads take us. Many prosecutors, when we learn that somebody is illegally selling firearms in our community, in our borough, we investigate. We try to introduce an undercover in the mix, get the guns, but then we take down the case and we get that one gun runner or gun dealer off the street. I have a different approach. My approach is I want that gun dealer off the street, but I want to find out who's the source of that gun. Where's that gun coming from? And in a couple of long-term undercover investigations that we did with the NYPD last year, where we recovered in total over 300 guns.
That's quite a lot.
Yes. The lead, the evidence led us down to Georgia. And many of these guns that end up on the streets of Brooklyn and on the streets of New York City are coming from these states down south because they have lax gun laws like Georgia, the Peachtree State. Folks down there can get guns easily, right? And so some of those folks in the two investigations I'm talking about, they took advantage of the lax gun laws down there. Some of the guns were purchased, over the internet. But then they send those guns up to New York City, and they believe that those guns will end up in the hands of criminals. They send them up I-95 in cars, on buses. We also had a case where they were actually smuggling guns on passenger airlines, Delta airline flights, and bringing them to New York. And we found that gun ring, and we broke it up. So the important approach I think we have to take is to not just be satisfied with arresting the local gun dealer. We need to get to the folks who are sending these guns up to Brooklyn to be used to create mayhem, to kill our police officers, and to shoot and injure our children. So what I'm determined to do is the folks down south, or wherever these guns are coming from, when they're sending them up, believing that they're sending them up to criminals, I believe that they should be arrested, like we did in those two cases, indicted, and extradited from Georgia and put on Rikers Island where they belong. And so that's what I'm doing, and that's what we did. And that one case that I mentioned about the passenger flights was important because we uncovered in the Brooklyn DA's office this gun smuggling ring that was based in Brooklyn, the Canarsie section of Brooklyn, and based in Atlanta, Georgia, that involved former and current Delta airline employees. There was a loophole in our national security and in our airport security down in the airport in Atlanta, the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, International Airport, where pilots had to go through a metal detector, flight attendants, any passengers before you can board a plane. But if you're a ramp worker or a luggage handler, you didn't have to go through the metal detector. You showed up for work, you would park your car in an employee parking lot, a bus would come get you, an airport bus, and drop you off at the terminal, and you just badged in, and you were in the terminal. We allege that these guys in this one gun case took advantage of that loophole, where one of the current employees for Delta would get the guns outside the airport, and then he would go to work, he would badge in, then he would meet his buddy in the restroom, and he would give his buddy all of these guns, including assault weapons.
Already inside the security.
Right inside the terminal. And his buddy would put them in his knapsack and get on the plane and fly to New York. And we were able to interdict 155 guns from that particular gun running ring. The danger, though, is imagine if they didn't just smuggle guns on the plane, but bombs.
Right.
And so folks were sitting next to one of the defendants in that case thinking he was an average passenger, not knowing that he had assault weapons in his knapsack on those flights. And so that's important to get to the gun violence. You're right, the guns are not made here. So we have to go where the guns are coming from.
There is also I want to call it the internationalization of crime, certainly with the explosion of drug use, some of which is domestic, but a lot of which is imported. But it seems to me that modern criminal activity includes terrorism, includes cyber crimes that are hard to combat just from a local prosecutor's point of perspective and limited jurisdiction. How do you work with federal agencies? What relationships does your office have there?
Well, Ken, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor in Brooklyn. So I'm familiar with the FBI, and I worked as an attorney in the U.S. Treasury Department in Washington, D.C., and my boss was over the Secret Service. So I know the capabilities of the Secret Service as well, and Customs and other federal agencies. When I became Brooklyn DA, one of the first things I did was to go meet the folks in the Secret Service office, because folks don't know the New York Secret Service office is based in Brooklyn, in the same office that the DA's office is located in. And so I went to say hello. And I know that the Secret Service does more than just protect the president. That is a critical role they play, but they also do so much in terms of cybercrime, credit card fraud.
Counterfeiting.
Yes, and so I went to them and said, how can we work together? How can we do investigations together? Because we have to team up to protect the people of Brooklyn from identity theft and all types of crimes. So that's one way. Another way is I met with the director of the ATF. I said, we need to figure out a way.
That's the federal agency that deals with
yes, guns.
Guns.
The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosions. So I met with the head of the ATF early in my tenure to say, look, I'm determined to do all I can to protect the streets of Brooklyn from gun violence. How can we partner? You have enormous resources. Starting to form relationships. We have relationships with the FBI, and we have relationships with the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's right across the street from my office. It is important, I think, for local prosecutors to work closely with the federal counterparts to make sure we do all we can to keep the people of Brooklyn safe. And since I come out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, I have and worked in the Treasury Department, I have a sense of how to do that.
You had a recent economic crimes case, the kind of thing that sometimes gets overlooked because people think of it as a victimless crime, where you work closely with a number of federal agencies to bring down a fraud ring. Tell us about that.
Recently, we arrested 23 people here in New York, in Brooklyn, including 9 doctors, for engaging in Medicaid fraud. And we also indicted 8 companies. So in total, there was one of the biggest cases of Medicaid fraud that we've had in the city, especially in terms of the number of doctors. What we had there essentially was we had a conspiracy among doctors and others to exploit poor people and homeless people. They went to homeless shelters. They went to soup kitchens. They went to welfare offices in Brooklyn and in Manhattan and the Bronx. And they offered free sneakers and free shoes to people, homeless people. They literally had recruiters go out to these locations and offer free shoes or sneakers if the person had a valid Medicaid card. And if they had a valid Medicaid card, they would drive the person to a clinic and then have them subject themselves to a battery of tests. They went to podiatrists, they went to others. Also, they can just bill Medicaid. And so this
wasn't about preventive care. This was
no, it wasn't. And literally, they ordered devices for folks, durable medical equipment, ankle braces, orthotic insoles, so they could bill Medicaid. And we allege that in a 2-year period, this ring made $7 million. And so we recently took down the case because we have to, and we worked closely with federal partners to do that, and with the Human Resource Administration here in the city with Commissioner Steve Banks. We did that because we have to protect Medicaid. It was designed to serve low-income folks, not to be exploited and not to be ripped off.
Right. And if people think it's being ripped off in Congress and elsewhere, then they figure the money is just being wasted, and why bother to support it. Now, your supervisor, I guess, when you were in the U.S. Attorney's Office, is now designated to be Attorney General of the United States. Maybe by the time this is broadcast, she'll be confirmed, but it doesn't seem to be moving very quickly.
Unfortunately.
You know, it must be very demoralizing to see whether her confirmation is being held up, Loretta Lynch, by presidential politics, by race, but it must be frustrating as a law enforcement professional to see somebody with career record that she has being stalled over things that are completely unrelated to her qualifications.
It is. Loretta Lynch is eminently qualified to serve as United States Attorney General. I don't believe that President Obama could have selected a better person for the job. She will serve this country with honor and distinction. When you look at the delay, no one can talk about her qualifications because they're impeccable. But her character as a person is second to none. And when you look at Loretta's life, she comes out of Greensboro, North Carolina, and she fought her way into Harvard University and then made it to Harvard Law School and has served the people of Brooklyn and really this country as U.S. Attorney twice. She deserves better. She should be confirmed without delay. And I believe that when little girls see Loretta Lynch, they will see, and young boys too, what they can become, because she represents the American dream.
My thanks to Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY-TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or contact us at CUNY.TV.